From the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, this is Democracy Now!
The president, it's no secret, has made it very clear that he's a pro-life president. He wants to stand up for all Americans, including the unborn. And I think the reinstatement of this policy is not just something that echoes that value, but respects taxpayer funding as well.
In one of his first acts in office, President Trump reinstates the controversial global gag rule, banning U.S. funding for any international healthcare organization that performs abortions or advocates for the legalization of abortion or even mentions the word. We'll get response from Planned Parenthood Vice President Don Legans, then to Trump's war on the press.
As you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth.
As the Trump administration pushes so-called alternative facts to counter reality, we'll speak with the nation's Mark Hertsgaard and filmmaker Brian Knappenberger, director of Nobody Speak: Trials of the Free Press. And as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee narrowly approves the nomination of ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson to be Secretary of State, we speak to former Vice President Al Gore.
ExxonMobil has financed climate denial. And every year they say they have stopped. And then when the funding reports come out at the end of the year, we find that they have continued. I think what ExxonMobil has done is deeply unethical.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump withdrew the United States from the sweeping Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal known as the TPP Monday. It would have encompassed 12 Pacific Rim nations, including the U.S., and 40% of the global economy. The TPP faced years of global public resistance by those who say free trade deals benefit corporations at the expense of health and environmental regulations. The TPP became a major issue during the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and eventually former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton all said they would withdraw from the deal if elected. Lori Wallach of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch said Trump's executive order Monday, quote, will bury the moldering corpse of a deal that couldn't gain majority support in Congress. But the question is going forward, will President Trump's new trade policies create American jobs and reduce our damaging trade deficit while raising wages and protecting the environment and public health, not just here, but also in trade partner nations, Wallach asked. On Monday, President Trump also reinstated the controversial global gag rule, a Reagan-era policy that bans U.S. funding for any international health care organizations that perform abortions, advocate for the legalization of abortion, or even provide information about abortion. This is White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
The president, it's no secret, has made it very clear that he's a pro-life president. He wants to stand up for all Americans, including the unborn. And I think the reinstatement of this policy is not just something that echoes that value, but respects taxpayer funding as well, and ensures that we're standing up not just for life for the unborn, but for also taxpayer funds that are being spent overseas to perform an action that is contrary to the values of this president, and I think continue to further illustrate, not just to the folks here in this country, but around the world, of what a value we place on life.
Trump signed the global gag rule only 2 days after millions of people poured into the streets of Washington, D.C. and cities around the world for the historic Women's March on Washington. We'll have more on the global gag rule after headlines. President Trump had his first meeting with congressional lawmakers Monday, during which he again lied about the 2016 election results. He falsely claimed he lost the popular vote because 3 to 5 million unauthorized immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. Experts say there's no evidence of voter fraud during the 2016 election. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's vowed the United States would take a hard military line against China in the South Chinese Sea, one of the busiest trade routes in the world, which also has significant oil and gas reserves. The U.S. claims the area is international water, while China claims territorial control. Longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson said during his confirmation hearing for Secretary of State he would stop China from accessing islands where it has installed weapon systems and built airstrips in the area. Tillerson's comments prompted Chinese state media to say the U.S. would have to wage war to stop China from accessing the islands. Spicer also suggested Monday the Trump administration would move quickly to push through the contested $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline.
I'm not going to get in front of the president's executive actions, but I will tell you that areas like Dakota and the Keystone Pipeline, areas that we can increase jobs, increase economic growth, and tap into America's energy supply more. That's something that he has been very clear about. I think the president is very, very keen on making sure that we maximize our use of natural resources to America's benefit. It's good for economic growth, it's good for jobs, and it's good for American energy.
The pipeline has faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux in North Dakota, members of hundreds of Native American tribes, as well as their non-Native allies. On Monday, here at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, water protectors blocked the entrance to a Chase Bank lounge to protest the connection of one of the festival's leading sponsors to investment in the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is Bobby Jean Threelegs of the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota.
Right now, we're on a lockdown in front of Chase Bank because we want people across America to divest their money from these banks. The big banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, all the big banks, these are paying for the pipelines around the country. We want you to know what your money is being paid for and what it's being used for. And pretty much our lives are at risk right now. Everybody, there's already people's waters ruined around the country, and we're just trying to protect that. We want to know that seven generations ahead that our children are going to be okay.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Monday the United States has not decided whether it will attempt to take the controversial step of moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The move is fiercely opposed by Palestinians and much of the world community. This is Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
We say to Mr. Trump that we hope he will not move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because Jerusalem, from the Israeli point of view, is a united city, and this is not correct and illegal. Therefore, moving the embassy to any place will be a step ahead of anything that may happen in the future and will damage the peace process. Also, we hope to stop these comments and to start negotiations based on international legitimacy.
That was Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. During Monday's news conference, Sean Spicer also refused to answer repeated questions by reporters about what the national unemployment rate is. He ultimately claimed the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out several versions of this figure. Former Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo was sworn in as CIA director after being approved by the Senate Monday. His confirmation had faced opposition over concerns about his position on torture. In the past, Pompeo falsely claimed so-called enhanced interrogation tactics, such as waterboarding, were constitutional. But he reversed his decision during his confirmation hearing, saying he's now against torture. On Monday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted 11-10 to approve longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State. Florida Senator Marco Rubio was the swing vote. He had said he might vote against Tillerson, but instead decided to back him. Tillerson's confirmation will go before the full Senate next week. Georgia Congressmember Tom Price faces his second confirmation hearing to head the Department of Health and Human Services today, where he's expected to face more questions about his investments in medical and drug companies and potential conflicts of interest. Democrats have delayed the confirmation vote for Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. The Senate Judiciary Committee was slated to vote on his confirmation today, but will now vote January 31st. If approved, the full Senate will not vote until February. Democrats have also asked for a second confirmation hearing for billionaire Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary amidst widespread concerns about potential conflicts of interest stemming from her family's many investments, including in private charter schools and a student loan company. Trump has tapped Federal Communications Commissioner Ajit Pai to be the FCC chair. Pai is a fierce opponent of net neutrality rules, which seek to keep the Internet open and prevent corporate service providers from blocking access to websites, slowing down content, or providing paid fast lanes for Internet service. Activists fear Pai may now roll back net neutrality rules adopted by the FCC in recent years. U.S. officials say they're investigating a phone call between President Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's ambassador to the United States. The call was on December 29th, the same day President Obama imposed sanctions against Russia and expelled diplomats as retaliation for the alleged Russian hacking of the U.S. election. U.S. officials are also investigating a handful of Donald Trump's close associates, including former campaign manager Paul Manafort, over possible ties to Russia. President Trump is handing ambassadorships to two of his major campaign donors. Private equity executive Louis Eisenberg, who began his career at Goldman Sachs, will become the U.S. ambassador to Italy. Private equity executive William Hagerty, who served as an economic advisor to George H.W. Bush, will become the U.S. ambassador to Japan. In Yemen, one of the first drone strikes launched under the new Trump administration killed at least 10 people Saturday. Yemeni news reports say the victims of the strike were al-Qaeda fighters. U.S.-backed Saudi-led airstrikes killed more than 50 people over the weekend as part of the Saudi and Yemeni armies' campaign to seize control of Mocha. On Monday, the Yemeni army said it had taken control of the port city. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is suing the nation's largest student loan servicer, Navient, accusing it of, quote, systematically and illegally failing borrowers at every stage of repayment, unquote. Navient services $300 billion in private and federal loans. The suit argues the company illegally increased the cost of the loans for millions of students. In Mexico, widespread protests against the government's decision to raise fuel prices by more than 20% continue to rock the country. On Sunday, protesters took to the streets for coordinated demonstrations in Mexico City and at least 12 Mexican states. Protesters in Tijuana seized control of one of the busiest border crossings along the U.S. border, forcing Mexican authorities to abandon their posts. This is one of the protesters.
I am here because I am in disagreement with all the policies of the government of Enrique Peña Nieto and what his whole cabinet has imposed on this country, which has caused a lack of equality, inflation. They continue to rob, continue taking from the country.
New York City taxpayers will pay $75 million to settle a class action lawsuit against the New York Police Department over its issuing of nearly 1 million criminal summons that were later dismissed for lack of evidence. Lawyers say the summons were selectively and disproportionately issued in communities of color. The British Supreme Court has ruled the British Parliament must approve Britain's plans to leave the European Union, a process known as Brexit. The 8-3 ruling Tuesday does not mean Britain will stay in the EU, although it could delay Brexit and allows pro-EU lawmakers to influence the terms of Britain's departure. In news from Trump inauguration protests, the legal team behind Friday's Disrupt J20 actions in Washington, D.C., has sued the police for using excessive force when officers attacked protesters with batons, tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbang grenades indiscriminately and repeatedly, they said. Well over 200 protesters were arrested Friday, nearly all of them facing a possible 10-year prison sentence after being charged with felony riot. Their cell phones, which were confiscated by police after arrest, have not been returned. And nationwide, activists are taking to social media to declare their support for Palestinian-American activist Linda Sarsour, who's facing Islamophobic attacks online after she served as one of the 4 main organizing co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington. On Monday, Sarsour called for extra prayers in a Facebook post, writing, quote, "The opposition cannot fathom to see a Palestinian Muslim-American woman that resonates with the masses. They have a coordinated attack campaign against me, and it's vicious and ugly," she said. In response, thousands of people and organizations, including Amnesty International, are showing their support for Sarsour using the hashtag #IMarchWithLinda. This is Linda Sarsour speaking to 500,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. Saturday for that Women's March on Washington.
If you have come here today as your first time at a march, I welcome you. I ask you to stand and continue to keep your voices loud for Black women, for Native women, for undocumented women, for our LGBTQIA community if you are going the right way, follow women of color, sisters and brothers. We know where we need to go, and we know where justice is.
Yeah, you try. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Just 2 days after millions of people poured into the streets of Washington, D.C. and cities around the world for the historic Women's March on Washington, President Trump has reinstated the controversial global gag rule, which women's rights advocates fear will increase unsafe abortions around the world. The policy originated during the Reagan era, and it bans U.S. funding for any international health care organization that performs abortion or advocates for the legalization of abortion or even mentions abortion, even if those activities are funded by non-U.S. money. Trump signed the order surrounded by 7 other men. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was questioned about the move on Monday.
Of all the policy or actions that the president could have taken today, he chose to reinstate the Mexico City policy. What message is he sending here? Does he see the elimination, reduction of abortions as an American value? And also, here at home, can pro-life Americans expect him to put his signature on legislation that will defund Planned Parenthood?
Well, I think the president, it's no secret, has made it very clear that he's a pro-life president. He wants to stand up for all Americans, including the unborn. And I think the reinstatement of this policy is not just something that echoes that value, but respects taxpayer funding as well, and ensures that we're standing up not just for life of the unborn, but for also taxpayer funds that are being spent overseas to perform an action that is contrary to the values of this president, and I think continue to further illustrate not just to the folks here in this country, but around the world of what a value we place on life.
The global gag rule is seen by many as a major global barrier to access to crucial women's health services. In this animated video, the president of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, explains how the policy works.
This rule, also known as the Mexico City policy, was first put in place 3 decades ago by President Reagan. Current U.S. policy already restricts organizations from using U.S. funds to pay for abortions, but the gag rule goes even further by dictating what they can do with their own money. This means that if a clinic receives even $1 of U.S. foreign assistance for family planning, its doctors and nurses are limited in what they can do to help their patients. They can't counsel a woman on the full range of health options legally available to her, refer her to another provider for specialized care, or even give her a pamphlet with medically accurate information. That's why we call it the global gag rule, because it prevents doctors from talking to their patients and providing services that are legal in their own countries and in the U.S., and it keeps people from participating in the democratic process of their own countries. This means clinics closing their doors, more unintended pregnancies, and more unsafe abortion.
The pro-choice group NARAL tweeted, Trump's reinstatement of the global gag rule officially turns his anti-woman, anti-choice rhetoric into policy. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire and Democratic Congresswoman Nita Lowey of New York announced they would introduce the HER Act to repeal the global gag rule. Well, for more, we're joined by Dawn Legans, Executive Vice President of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Dawn, welcome back to Democracy Now! The significance of this gag rule, and, I mean, do you see it as retaliation for what happened 2 days before? You have this historic Women's March. President Trump is obsessed with numbers. The march looks like it was 3 times larger than his crowd for his inauguration, which seems to be his top concern right now. Is this?
Well, I don't know if it's retaliation, but what I know is it is the targeting of the most vulnerable women in the whole world with a policy that is going to mean women will die because of this action. And it is outrageous, contrasted with the march, with the voices of women around the world saying that they expected more.
So explain exactly how this works.
So what happens is, and this is a more expansive version, by the way, of the global gag rule, worse than anything that happened under Ronald Reagan, because they have extended it to apply not just to family planning funds, but $8 billion in global health aid. And what it means is any organization that takes one of those dollars to do Zika prevention, to do HIV/AIDS counseling, to do family planning work, if they speak honestly to their clients, to their patients, about the full range of reproductive health options that are available, if they refer or advocate, or even, as you said, mention abortion, they will lose that funding and not be able to provide those other services, because unfortunately already abortion dollars cannot pay for abortion internationally, U.S. aid dollars.
You know, in the United States, I was listening to CNN, and one of the critics of Planned Parenthood, when someone said, at least in the United States, what abortion services that are provided in the country are something like 3% of the services that Planned Parenthood provides at the clinics?
Planned Parenthood provides a full range of reproductive health services. About 97% of those services are preventive health services.
So he asked, so why do they bother providing abortion?
Well, abortion is part of the full range of women's health care, and it's a legal right. I think one of the things that Sean Spicer forgets when he says that they're going to export American values, an American value is access to our constitutional rights, and abortion is one of them.
The Guttmacher Institute recently put out information, this again is in the United States, and the gag order applies internationally, put out information that abortions are at an all-time low, largely attributed to contraception. How will the global gag order affect access to contraception for women around the world?
Right. Principled organizations around the world will be forced to make a choice as to whether they accept those family planning dollars that they use to provide all kinds of family planning services, if they also are going to stay true to their mission of serving women with the full range of reproductive health services, or at least informing them. I mean, in many cases, this is just about if a woman is going to ask about an abortion, that they can't refer them to someone who could provide a safe, legal abortion, but have to let them be out in the world trying to figure this out on their own. And it really is insulting to women, their intelligence, and their freedom.
Does this go into effect immediately?
Organizations are going to have to immediately decide whether they are going to sign and abide by this gag rule. Organizations like Save the Children and CARE oppose these kinds of regulations, oppose global gag rules, because they know that it hurts women. I wanted to remind people that when Barack Obama took office 8 years ago and reversed the global gag rule, there were some 70,000 women a year dying from these policies being in place. That has dropped down to 20,000 now at the end of 8 years. And we're just very fearful that this is going to cause that number, that loss of life, maternal mortality, to skyrocket.
How will this affect Planned Parenthood in particular? You have your national series of clinics around the country, network of clinics. What about internationally?
We do support a lot of work internationally, and we don't take U.S. aid dollars internationally. But, of course, we're concerned about the rights and health of women across this country, and some of the same people who advocate for these policies in the global gag rule also are the people who are advocating for taking away the rights of women in America. And so we're very concerned, and as you know, these are the same people who are trying to defund Planned Parenthood and take away access to preventive health services like family planning for millions of women in this country.
I want to ask you about the confirmation hearing that's going to happen today for Tom Price, the second one. Last week, Donald Trump's pick for the head of Health and Human Services, Georgia Congressmember Tom Price, appeared before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions for his hearing. Price is the chair of the House Budget Committee, a member of the Tea Party caucus, one of the leading opponents of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. He opposes abortion, has voted to cut all federal funding for Planned Parenthood, also supports privatizing Medicare. Democratic Senator Patty Murray of Washington said women are deeply concerned about Price's nomination. This is Senator Murray questioning Price at last week's hearing.
Women are really deeply concerned about the impact this election could have on their access to health care that they need. I have heard from many of them. And according to Planned Parenthood, demand for IUDs, which is a form of long-lasting contraception, is up 900% since the election. So I want to ask you, will you commit to ensuring all 18 FDA-approved methods of contraception continue to be covered so that women do not have to go back to paying extra costs for birth control?
What I will commit to and assure is that women and all Americans need to know that we believe strongly that every single American ought to have access to the kind of coverage and care that they desire and want.
That's Congressman Price. His second confirmation hearing will take place today. Don Legans.
Very concerned, obviously, about the history of Tom Price, as you have mentioned. 65 times voted against the Affordable Care Act, has been a leader in the defunding and fight against Planned Parenthood services, and as you heard him, will not commit to protecting the preventive health services benefit. And we hear a lot about the 20 million people who may lose insurance coverage. We don't hear very much about the 55 million women who are getting no copay birth control today, saving $1.4 billion into their family budgets every year that they are threatening. And this is going to have a big impact. I call it the mom tax, right? They're just going to shift $1.4 billion back onto the ledgers of families in this country. And that's going to be a big shock to people. And it's going to mean a lot of people don't get the care and coverage and the birth control option that would work best for them.
Don Legans, I want to thank you for being with us, Executive Vice President of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. We're here in Park City, Utah at the Sundance Film Festival. When we come back, we're going to look at the first news conference of the new press secretary, Sean Spicer. Stay with us.
In a little tent, oh, I just like the river. I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know the change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. But I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know the change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Keeps telling me don't hang around. It's been a long.
That's Angelique Kidjo performing Sam Cooke's Change is Going to Come at the Women's March on Washington in Saturday. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we turn to look at President Trump, the media, and what the new administration calls alternative facts. On Saturday, in his first full day in office, Trump visited CIA headquarters. Speaking in front of the CIA's memorial wall, he told the agency he had a running war with the media.
So I can only say that I am with you 1,000%. And the reason you're my first stop is that, as you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. And they sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community. And I just want to let you know, the reason you're number one stop, it is exactly the opposite. Exactly. And they understand that, too.
That was just the beginning of the new administration's attack on the press, according to the Washington Post. After Trump returned from the CIA, he turned on the television to see hundreds of thousands of protesters taking part in the Women's March on Washington, an image showing large patches of white empty space on the mall during his inauguration. Many outlets were broadcasting images showing how the size of his inauguration was far smaller than Obama's first inauguration in 2009. Despite objections from his advisors, Trump then ordered his new press secretary, Sean Spicer, to walk out into the White House press room and read an emergency press statement.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. Even the New York Times printed a photograph showing that a misrepresentation of the crowd in the original tweet in their paper, which showed the full extent of the support, depth, and crowd and intensity that existed. These attempts to lessen the enthusiasm of the inauguration are shameful and wrong. The president is committed to unifying our country, and that was the focus of his inaugural address. This kind of dishonesty in the media, the challenging that bringing about our nation together, is making it more difficult. There's been a lot of talk in the media about the responsibility to hold Donald Trump accountable. And I'm here to tell you that it goes two ways. We're going to hold the press accountable as well.
That's White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. He left the stage before taking any questions Saturday afternoon. Then on Sunday, Meet the Press host Chuck Todd confronted Counselor to the President Kellyanne Conway about Spicer's lies.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The one thing he got right was Zeke Miller. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Then on Monday, Sean Spicer held his first official press briefing where he was grilled about his comments from Saturday. Spicer claimed, quote, "Sometimes we can disagree with the facts."
Before I get to a policy question, just a question about the nature of your job.
Yeah.
Is it your intention to always tell the truth from that podium, and will you pledge never to knowingly say something that is not factual?
It is. It's an honor to do this, and yes, I believe that we have to be honest with the American people. I think sometimes we can disagree with the facts. There are certain things that we may not fully understand when we come out, but our intention is never to lie to you, Jonathan. Our job is to make sure that sometimes, and you're in the same boat. I mean, there are times when you guys tweet something out or write a story and you publish a correction. That doesn't mean that you were intentionally trying to deceive readers and the American people, does it? And I think we should be afforded the same opportunity.
To talk more about President Trump and the media, we are joined by 2 guests. Here in Park City, Brian Knappenberger is with us, director of a new documentary premiering here at Sundance this afternoon called Nobody Speak: Trials of the Free Press. And in New York, Mark Hertzgaard is with us, investigative editor at The Nation magazine, author of 7 books, including On Bended Knee, The Press and the Reagan Presidency. So, Brian, let's begin with you. Yeah. What happened this weekend? You've got this raging press secretary who storms out into the press room. They say that he's going to hold a press briefing. They wait for an hour, a press conference, and he just makes these series of lies, says it was the largest inauguration not only in U.S. history, but in the world.
Right. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary even listening to the clips you just played. I mean, and remembering we're on day 3 here of this Trump administration. But really what we're seeing is an extension of what we've been seeing, what we've seen from the last year from candidate Trump. I mean, his rise was really a result of an all-out assault on the press. I mean, it was one thing after another. He would berate the press. He called them names, scum. He said he was going to open up libel laws and sue you like you've never been sued before. He would go around the press. He would attack even things like satire, things like Saturday Night Live or the cast of Hamilton or something. I mean, anything that threatened him or anything that approached a adversarial question at all, he would just go crazy with. So I think we're in a period where this is something we really have to worry about. We just don't know what this guy will be capable of doing with the executive branch at his control.
Mark Hertzgaard, your first impressions of the President Trump presidency dealing with the press.
You heard Mr. Trump himself say it. He is in a war with the press, and it has been long-standing. You know, there's an old saying in media circles, though, it's never wise for an elected official to pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. Now, that's a reference to 100 years ago when it was newspapers that dominated the press. But I think that Donald Trump is going down a very dangerous road here. I think what's interesting, having written a book about the White House press corps and how, in general, the White House press corps wants to get along with any president, whatever the party. They want to have access to White House officials. They like to do that inside baseball kind of coverage. I think that what might be happening here, though, is that Donald Trump and his administration, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, may end up provoking the Washington press corps and the mainstream media in general into becoming an adversarial press, which is not what they want to do, the media. It is what the Constitution and American civics calls on the media to do, to hold presidents and elected officials accountable by being adversarial, by asking tough questions. In general, that's not the way the Washington press corps operates, and yet I think when they now have a choice. Trump is so aggressive against them, and Spicer as well, that the Washington press corps is either going to respond back and be adversarial, or they're just going to take it. And I think that that's probably not going to end well for either party, and certainly not for the White House. I think they're going down a dangerous road that they're going to regret. But the problem is they've got a president who has a habit of telling falsehoods and has a very thin skin. You mentioned, Amy, that he ordered Sean Spicer to go out there and give that statement on Saturday with knowable, easily demonstrable falsehoods. You know, that plays to his political base, the 1 out of 3 Americans who are going to stick with Donald Trump no matter what. I don't think it's going to play to that middle 1/3 of Americans, some of whom voted for him in November.
I want to go back to Monday's press conference with the press secretary, Sean Spicer. I want to go to this clip right now of Sean Spicer. He talked at the end of the news conference about how demoralizing it was for the press to be critical of the president. Let's see if we can get that clip.
I think over and over again, there's this constant attempt to undermine his credibility and the movement that he represents. And it's frustrating for not just him, but I think so many of us that are trying to work to get this message out. And so I mentioned this to Jonathan, but part of this is a two-way street. Like, we want to have a healthy dialogue, not just with you, but with the American people. Because he's fighting for jobs, he's fighting to make this country safer. But when you're constantly getting told that can't be true, we doubt that you can do this, this won't happen, and that's the narrative when you turn on television every single day, it's a little frustrating.
So there you have Sean Spicer, that it's demoralizing when the press is critical, Brian.
It's demoralizing when the press is critical. It's a comical statement, almost. What's the purpose of a free and independent press? It is to be critical. It's to speak truth to power. I think they got to get over it and understand that they're in the they're in the business of running the country now, and focus on what they need to be doing, and understand that this is critical to the way things work.
Let's talk about Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press. I mean, this is a remarkable film where you really look at the lead up to this administration and all that took place, and President Trump's supporters, specifically Peter Thiel. Tell us what you found and why you have spent this time looking at Peter Thiel, suits against the press, and what it means for today.
Right. Well, this film actually started as a kind of deep dive into the Hulk Hogan Gawker Media case, in which Hulk Hogan was suing Gawker Media for posting a sex tape of him. And so I was interested in that. I thought it was a really interesting First Amendment versus privacy kind of case. And so we started making a documentary, but then we realized afterwards there was a $140 million verdict against Gawker, which was the death sentence for Gawker. They were forced into bankruptcy. And then it was revealed that Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley investor, venture capitalist, early Facebook investor, was actually funding Hulk Hogan's lawsuit. So the film became something very different. We started looking at this notion of Peter Thiel funding this lawsuit that led to the death of this online website, and that, of course, was before he spoke at the RNC, became a Trump supporter, and eventually became part of the Trump transition team. So That was an opening that we needed to look at how money really has a leverage against news organizations and how news organizations might be vulnerable to people with an axe to grind.
Let's go to a clip from your documentary, Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press. This is Washington Post media columnist Margaret Sullivan, the former public editor for the New York Times.
Trump has done a number of things over the course of his campaign that should give us a great deal of cause for concern. Among them are his lack of transparency, his inaccessibility, his extremely harsh criticism and even abuse of journalists.
When I raising money for veterans, excuse me, I've watched you on television. You're a real beauty.
Immigrants on the whole
Come on, try getting it out. Try getting it out.
I'll get it out.
I mean, I don't know if you're going to put this on television, but you don't even know what you're talking about.
He's really been vociferous in his criticism of the press.
Is this what it's going to be like covering you if you're president?
Yeah, it is.
We're going to have this kind of confrontation in the press room?
Okay, yeah, it is going to be like this, David.
In general, he's called the media and reporters scum. He has said over and over and over again that they're dishonest, that they're corrupt.
They don't want to give it straight because the press are liars. They're terrible people.
These are the most dishonest human beings right back.
Brian Knappenberger, director of Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press. That's a clip from it and the significance of this. And tell us more about Peter Thiel and also what the attack on Gawker meant for journalism, whether or not people like Gawker, and Sheldon Adelson and what happened with him in the takeover of Las Vegas paper.
Right. Well, first of all, yeah, Gawker is a controversial site. A lot of people hated it, but I think that even if you think that they might have done something wrong, the fact that they were that this, first of all, enormous verdict, the fact that they would have lost this case, and then the fact that it could have been sort of the sort of secretive working behind the scenes, chess moves behind the scenes in order to get rid of them, was disturbing to a lot of people. We also look at the secretive purchase of the Las Vegas Review-Journal by Sheldon Adelson. This is an extraordinary story of a free press where the reporters at the Las Vegas Review-Journal were informed in a meeting, a big meeting, that their paper had been bought, which is, you know, an extraordinary thing for anybody in any company. Wow, we have new owners. And of course, being reporters, they said, well, who did it? Who's our new owner, and what are their expectations? What's their perspective? I think it's a natural question, and the answer that they got was, don't worry about it. You don't need to know. Just do your jobs.
You don't need to know who owns you.
You don't need to know who owns you. So the reporter said, well, wait a minute. What is our jobs? That is our job. So they immediately went to work trying to figure this out. Who bought the paper? And so we follow that story, which I think is a pretty extraordinary tale of journalism, trying to figure out who bought the paper. That's their boss. So their jobs were on the line.
Peter Thiel and Donald Trump's relationship, the image of them hugging at the tech meeting in New York at Trump Tower when all the other tech leaders were there.
It's extraordinary. Yeah, I don't think they as far as I can tell, they didn't really know each other before the Gawker verdict. I think Trump, when he heard about it, was quoted as saying, "Oh, I love him," and so clearly they've been they are like-minded in many ways. So yeah, I think that's that. If this is the
and what all of this bodes for now.
Yeah, so I think we've got two things going on. We've got this vulnerability of the press to potentially, you know, people with a lot of money, billionaires who might have an axe to grudge, who are thin-skinned, that don't want to hear a word of criticism. And unfortunately, now we have one of those people in the executive branch of the United States government, who's one of the most powerful institutions in the world.
Finally, I wanted to go back to Mark Hertsgaard in New York, to the media's coverage of the Women's March all over the country.
Washington covering the March for the Nation, and it was striking to me just how large this demonstration was. I've covered a lot of demonstrations in my career, and I think that it was, you showed some of the pictures, Amy. You know, this was very possibly the single largest political demonstration in United States history, just the Washington event. If you add in New York, Los Angeles, where even the police said 500,000 people.
Los Angeles was larger than Washington.
Well, even the police said 500,000 in Los Angeles. So this was the biggest day of political protest in U.S. history. country. And somehow most of the mass media, the corporate media, missed that point. It was happening right in front of them, and yet they are not inclined to go out and cover social movements. They had pictures of it, but they had nobody on the ground. And so after I came back in from witnessing the protests, I, of course, turned on the television and watched CNN and then CBS, and they discussed this without the benefit of an actual journalist being on the panel. There was Republican political hacks and Democratic political hacks talking about the supposed meaning and aims of this march, but nobody who had actually been there on the ground, who did journalism 101. Talk to the people who are there. Ask them why they are doing it. I want to give a quick shout out to Democracy Now! You guys were broadcasting live from there, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that's what journalism should be. So I think, getting back to this film that you're talking about, I very much want to watch that film. I think it points up, though, that this is a moment of truth for the American media, the corporate media included. They will either stand up to the Trump administration, which is very clearly engaged in a war on the media. The choice is either to stand up to that and fight back, or to get rolled. And I think that if they stand up, that they will find that the American public is ready and waiting for real journalism.
Well, people can binge watch Democracy Now's coverage of the Women's March on Washington at democracynow.org. And also, just to say, the media very much focused, and maybe President Trump was very aware of this, he took on continually comparing the crowds of his inauguration to President Obama. But the fact is, as the New York Times headline said, the Women's March was 3 times larger in Washington, D.C. than his inauguration crowd. This is Democracy Now! Brian Knappenberger, thanks for being with us. Good luck on your premiere today, Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press. Mark Hertzgaard, stay with us as we talk about Donald Trump and the environment. My interview with Vice President Al Gore here in Park City. Stay with us.
Broken down the Goddamn River, from the Enos, traveling the waterways of our ancestors' rivers of time, cypress, cedar, and pine, painted paddles in our hands, pouring through this sacred land, water, song, spirit, and rhythm alive. Blessings as we look to our Father sky, seeing the eagle lift our oars up high. In Thanksgiving protocol, we ask permission to dip way down the mother's lifeblood will flow through her
Paraphrase singing My People, My Land here on Democracy Now! and democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from the Sundance Film Festival here in Park City, Utah. On Sunday, I moderated a panel that included former Vice President Al Gore, talking about what climate policy might look like under the Trump administration. A sequel to his groundbreaking film, An Inconvenient Truth, is just premiered here at the festival, called An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. The title of a whole track here at Sundance is The New Climate, in every sense of the word. And I thought no better person to address this than someone who won a Nobel Peace Prize for his environmental activism and an Academy Award for the film about him, The Inconvenient Truth. I know that the current president of the United States has called for the Nobel Committee to rescind that Peace Prize because of your focus on climate change. And Vice President Gore, I wanted to ask you about the latest developments. We have a new president who's chosen for his cabinet a man he himself calls, as Secretary of State, Mr. Exxon. And just this week, in the pre-inaugural activities and addressing over 100 diplomats, he was looking for Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of the largest private oil corporation in the world, ExxonMobil. He was looking for him in the audience. And he said, "Rex, where are you?" And he turned to the diplomats and said, "He's led this charmed life. He goes into a country, takes the oil, goes into another country. It's tough dealing with these politicians, right?" he said. And then on Saturday, President Trump, his first visit was to the CIA, where he stood in front of the Wall of the Fallen, those CIA officials or agents who died in action. He mainly focused on the size of his inaugural audience, but he did talk about his plans and looked back in history. He was there with his hope for the head of the CIA, Congressmember Mike Pompeo, but he told the CIA officials that when the United States went into Iraq, we should have kept the oil. And then, of course, chosen as the head of the EPA, if he is approved, Scott Pruitt, the Oklahoma Attorney General, who has sued the EPA 14 times, not for doing too little, of course, but for engaging in any kind of regulation. You've met with the president in this transition period, and I was wondering if you can assess this new climate and our new president.
That was a long story you told there. I do want to begin by complimenting you, Amy, for the power of the stories that you tell and that you make possible for other people to tell, and you do a wonderful job. You were going through that list of recent news stories and developments, and I was getting a little PTSD from the early days of the Bush-Cheney administration, and I remember feeling that when a new outrage came up, I got to the point where I had to download some existing outrage in order to make room for. We don't yet know how this story of the new administration will unfold. And there have been, for those of us working on the climate issue, and by the way, I also wanted to say a word about Bob Redford. I said this at lunch, and it's true. While I was still learning about climate, Bob Redford was already acting on the climate issue to try to help solve it, and what has been created here at Sundance is extraordinary, and I want to circle back to that. We don't yet know how this will unfold, but those of us who've been working on climate for a long time have encountered a long string of obstacles, and now we do have another one. But President Nasheed said earlier that it's an economic story now. And I think the power of that economic story may well overcome the old narrative of climate denial versus the truth. They have already adjusted to have a uniform new script that tries to avoid the label of climate denial, and they've reached a way station that my friend Dave Roberts, who writes for Vox, calls lukewarmism. And yet that is a way station from which further change may be possible. But the hopeful story of what has developed in the last decade since An Inconvenient Truth came out is that the cost of electricity from renewable sources, principally solar and wind, and now the cost of energy storage, principally in batteries, and the cost of hundreds of new efficiency technologies that are not as well known but are transformative, all those costs have come down so rapidly that they've created a new world of opportunity that is irresistible for business and industry and investors. The sustainability revolution that is now unfolding in the world is in the historical sequence of the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, information revolution, but it's unique in this sense. It has the breadth and scope of the industrial revolution, which completely transformed our world over a century and a half or more, but it has the speed of the information revolution. It is happening extremely rapidly, and it is changing everything.
So your thoughts, you've devoted many years now to telling people the story of climate change, to warning people about what is happening. We now have a climate change denying president, proudly denying it, calling it a Chinese hoax. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are and what you said to him when you met with him, and how we move forward from here.
Well, as you may know, I still feel that it's the appropriate thing for me to do to protect the privacy of that communication and subsequent communications. Because I think it's always better to have the opportunity to communicate, so long as there is a chance that it will do some good. And as I said before, we have yet to see how these chapters will unfold in this new administration. The events of yesterday give me a great deal of hope. I think that part of this story, underreported, as you mentioned, is that we are seeing the beginning of the biggest outpouring of citizen activism that we've seen since the Vietnam War. And we have to translate it into action.
And I'll just push this one last question around the Secretary of State, because this is truly unprecedented. The choice of Rex Tillerson and your thoughts on the head of ExxonMobil, just resigned a few weeks ago to become the Secretary of State of the United States.
Yeah. ExxonMobil has financed climate denial. And every year they say they have stopped. And then when the funding reports come out at the end of the year, we find that they have continued. I think what ExxonMobil has done is deeply unethical. I think that in a world where other choices would be possible, we would have a different person selected for Secretary of State.
Vice President Al Gore, I was interviewing him here at a panel at the film festival on Sunday. I also asked him about the Dakota Access Pipeline. As Standing Rock Sioux Chair Dave Archambault was in the audience.
I've spoken out many times in support of Chairman Archambault and the Standing Rock Sioux tribal movement. I think I've publicly labeled it an atrocity. And I do think that, as Heather said, this is a moment that is filled with possibilities for raising awareness. And I mean, the short story is I am against it.
That was Al Gore speaking Sunday here at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. Well, on Monday, water protectors walked down Main Street and linked arms to block the entrance to a Chase Bank lounge in order to protest the connection of one of the festival's leading sponsors to investment in the Dakota Access Pipeline. They were joined by actor and activist Shailene Woodley and two filmmakers whose Viceland series Rise about Indigenous resistance is playing at the film festival. That does it for our show. If you want to see all of our coverage here at the film festival, the Oscar nominations have been announced. Among the documentaries, 13th and Life Animated. You can see our interviews at DemocracyNow.org. A very special happy birthday to Charina Nadura. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkner, Marine Shea, Carla Wills, Laura Gottis, Dina Guzder, Sam Alcoff, Robbie Karen, Honey Massoud, Andre Lewis, Julie Crosby, Renee Feltz, John Hamilton, Dennis Moynihan, Nicole Salazar, and Charina Nadura. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.